Welcome back to the Healing Motherhood Podcast. This is your host, Alexis Stearns, and we're here talking about healing and motherhood and why that is important. We are impacting our children and our children's children and our children's children when we heal. We are impacting the whole world because when you heal yourself, you heal the world. This week, we are talking about the connection to the body and how that can be impacted by a traumatic or a difficult or a complicated birthing process. When we have this complicated birth, traumatic birth, a surgical birth, it can lead to feeling like our body failed us. And I want to kind of challenge that belief. When we are feeling like our body failed us, I think it's important to point out that oftentimes these complications, interventions are happening because we're not feeling safe in our environment, because we're being pressured into intervention after intervention after intervention, because we're having cervical checks that feel icky or maybe aren't fully consented to, right? Maybe we don't even feel like we can say no. And if you think about it from that perspective, from the fact that your body was trying to keep you safe by stopping labor, by slowing labor down, if that's part of your story, isn't that incredible? Your body was actually protecting you. How cool is that? Your body felt those feelings of feeling unsafe, and it said, no. This is not a safe space to have my baby. This is not a safe space to do this. And so it stopped. I mean, how cool is that? So today what I wanted to share about was diving a little bit more into that cascade of interventions. And I wanted to share my birth story as an example of how this can happen. And oftentimes when I share my story, I'll get responses like, oh my gosh, that's exactly my story. So if you relate to this, I want you to know that you're not alone and that a birth like this, where the mom and the baby ended up safe, can still result in trauma in the brain. So when I was pregnant with my son, it was 2015, and I was working a pretty active job. And I remember thinking a lot that I would go into preterm labor. And I kind of kept that fear was kind of in the back of my mind. But then I got to about a month before his birthday. It was actually Christmas Eve, and I felt him drop. And I didn't have a very good understanding of physiological childbirth. My birth class in the hospital didn't really talk about that. And so when I felt him drop, I started to panic. I said, no, 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 no. It is not safe. We are not going into birth. And I got in my recliner and I said, you just get your way back up there. And he sure did. So I rested, and then I hosted Christmas Eve dinner, and he just moseyed back on up. He was like, okay, Mom, it's not safe. You said that's fine. So then about a month later, I think his due date was like the 15th or 16th, and he was not coming. My cervix was nowhere near ready at all. It was not, I hadn't had that pressure forcing my cervix to open because I had gotten him off my cervix. I'd said, no way, get up there. And so when it was time, there was no signs of readiness. And so we planned my induction for maybe like 40 weeks and 5 days. So I went in on a Sunday night. The only advice we had gotten was eat before you go. Eat before you go. Nobody said anything about turn down every single intervention they offer you. It was just eat before you go. Well, we ate, we went in, we did all the paperwork, all the things, we messed around. And they placed a cervical ripener on my cervix, and nothing happened. And so then they did another one, and then they did another intervention, right? So we're talking Cervidil, the other one, Cytotec, and then eventually a Foley bulb. And so then, after the Foley bulb, then came, a lot of medication because the Foley bulb is quite uncomfortable. And I don't know when the medication started because I do remember quite a lot of discomfort before we started any kind of pain medication. So then we had those, and then there was pain medication, and then there was Pitocin. I mean, you should see the records for this birth. It is, it's a thick file. So there was, when you look at all of these medications, it was a medication to speed things up, a medication to slow things down, a medication for pain, a medication to speed things up, a medication to slow things down, a medication for pain. And it was non-stop, intervention after intervention, water breaking. And so I had gone in on a Sunday night, and I think my cervix wasn't even dilating till Tuesday morning. And Tuesday morning is when the Foley bulb fell out, and then the waters were broken. And then I think the epidural was upped or placed multiple times on Tuesday. And, the first one didn't do anything, or they hadn't gotten it in right. So then I had to have another one placed. And then I remember having a lunch and my doctor being like, yeah, she needs to eat. She's been in labor for 2 days. So I had a light lunch, and then my dad came to visit, and then I had a nap, and then I woke up and I was ready to push, right? And I'd been at this point in the bed all day because I had an epidural, probably around 10. And then it was around 4:30, and I was ready to push. And so I gave a couple pushes, and the nurse goes, oh, this is going to be fast, but I can see his head. Well, it wasn't fast. So, and actually I'm going to pause there. And if this is too hard for you to hear, I would like to invite you to just, if you haven't grabbed my 3 tools to keep you cool, use those tools, grab them, I'll put them in the show notes. Use those to help you ground and get out of here. You do not need to hear this. And if you are on the edge of your seat because you have to hear it, because that helps you to make those connections and process. I hear you. I've been there, and you're welcome to stay, but please grab a cold drink of water, grab a warm tea, something where you can feel the water going down, maybe plant your feet on the ground and take a few deep breaths. So, in fact, I'll grab my warm drink too. So around 4:30, I started pushing. Was it 4:30? I don't know, somewhere late afternoon. It might have been 3:30 or 4:30, I started pushing. And, the nurse had said it's going to be fast. Well, I've got an epidural all the way down, I can't feel. And everybody is yelling when my contractions are because they don't know when they are. So they're yelling for me to push. Got my legs held back, and I'm pushing, nothing. Let's get the mirror. Let's do this. And eventually I start to notice, of course, my doctor's not here at this time because she was not there. She was still in clinic, and then she was going to go home and grab some dinner before she came back to catch the baby. Well, the nurse and the resident start exchanging glances. Like, this, something's not right. And so I did ask them, I said, what is going on? I am very sensitive to the energy in a space, and I could feel them, I could feel that something was off. And they didn't say much then, but maybe 5 or so minutes later, this had to have been around 6. They said, I think maybe we need to consider a cesarean. I'm nervous to use the forceps on you, which I don't know what your birth experience was like, and I don't know what you've seen in the birth spaces since then, but I definitely, knowing what I know now, am very glad that this young resident who did not feel comfortable using forceps on me did not, because I understand that that could have resulted in a lot of injury. So I said, okay, what does my doctor think? And so they called my doctor, and I talked to my doctor. She said, yeah, let's go ahead and do a cesarean. Well, I think what the nurse and the resident must have been seeing was some odd heart tones, because probably less than 10 minutes after, maybe even less than that, it had to have been really fast. We had said yes to the cesarean, and they started prepping me. And my husband was getting gear on to come with us. And less than 5 minutes later, it became emergent. And they said, we've got, I don't even know what they said actually, but all of a sudden, loads of people just came rushing in, and they were prepping me as we were rolling. It was insane. And I remember just looking up and saying, okay, this is it. And just thinking to myself that was fine. Like, I was totally fine with it being the end for me. I said, just please let this baby be okay. And so then as we were being rolled into the OR, I hear my doctor, and I say, oh, is that Dr. So-and-so? And she says, yep, I'm right here, and I don't know if she said anything reassuring or not, but I did feel a huge relief when I heard her voice, right? Because there's that element of safety. Even if she wasn't necessarily a great doctor, she was a great surgeon, I will say. But even if she wasn't a great doctor, I knew her. And so that safety that I felt when I heard her voice allowed me to kind of feel safe for a moment. And then as they increase the medication, your body can start to feel different. So when I forgot a really important piece right there, right before that thought of, this is the end, I think it was triggered probably by them not letting my husband come in. So they stopped him and they said, you can't come back. And so they went ahead and took me, and that is, I think, what triggered that, was losing him as my safety net, right? So then I remember getting in there, and I am freezing, right? They've got my hands were down as many times they are. So knowing that you can request a gentle C-section or have that in your plan is a good thing to know. I did not have that in mind, and I did not talk to my doctor about it. So my hands were down, and it was freezing, right? The medication, the room, the sterile space. And I said, I just want my hands on my chest. And I don't know if the medication came up to my chest or if this poor student behind me, she just looked like a doe in headlights. And I don't know if she put some pressure on my chest or if the warmth of the medication came up. But I was like hysterical at that point. And so then she did that. And then, I could hear them talking, double glove, all this stuff. And then they got him out of there pretty quickly. So he was born at like 6:30 something. And he came out, he wasn't making a sound, which is actually what they wanted because there had been meconium in my waters. And so when he came out, they actually did not want him to cry. They wanted to make sure that he didn't get any of those waters in his lungs. but they ended up having to give him a little help breathing afterwards. Came out with an APGAR of like 1. And then they let my husband in, and he got to see him and see me. And then they were getting ready to take him to the NICU. And I don't actually remember this on a personal level, but my husband has videos. This nurse said, "Can mom see baby before you take him?" And I think that that's a big, that could have been a really big part of my trauma, and it is not a part of my story. And I'm sorry if it's part of yours. But I was able to see him before they took him away. So I was able to know that he was okay. And then they took him, and I said to my husband, I said, "I want you to go with him." And that was something we had talked about because we had a friend whose child had gone to the NICU, and we wanted to make sure that the baby had somebody with him at all times. So then after they left, there were some complications, and I could kind of feel them digging around in my uterus, which I know is like an awful description, but that's what it felt like. And maybe not even in my uterus. They would have been just, I don't know. Well, I guess probably they were digging around my uterus. And so I said, "What is going on? I can feel you digging around." And my doctor snapped at the anesthesiologist. "Why is she feeling this?" And I feel like I shouted, but I have no idea how it came out. I just said, "I want to be asleep." And that is the last thing I remember. They put me out. And so then I remember I don't necessarily remember waking up, but I do remember being wheeled to the NICU to see him before they took me up to recover back in L&D. And so I must have been hysterical. I really wanted to see him. I wanted to hold him, but I do not think that happened at that point. Maybe it did with a lot of support. But I'm trying to think back to the videos and the pictures because I didn't actually really remember a lot of this. I had so many drugs, and then I was also on pain medication now because of that makes you really sore, right? There was meconium found in my abdominal cavity, so they were searching my uterus for any holes or anything like that to, make sure that my uterus was intact and that there hadn't been a rupture. So they couldn't find a hole or anything like that, but they just, had the high risk or the maternal fetal medicine doctor come in and take a look. And actually my doctor called her ex-husband, who was also in the field, and said, "Would you come look at this?" She had never seen anything like it. So I was out for probably close to 2 hours. Well, maybe less than that. I don't know how long everything takes in recovery and stuff. But the next thing that was in my kind of timeline, it looked like it was around 8:30 that I was woken back up. So that was definitely interesting. I feel like I want to just leave my birth story at that for now, because when you get into the parts after that and being awake and the NICU trauma, that's all a whole nother beast. But I feel like that gives you a really good example of the cascade of interventions. So my theory, and I've never had any confirmation on this, is that all of the pressure from the Pitocin, all of the interventions and the the pressure from labor and Pitocin and all the things that they did, I think just pushed the meconium out through the uterine muscles, or there was some kind of spill when she cut me open. Although I will say my scar, I get so many comments on how beautiful my scar is, and this doctor truly is a surgeon. She is not somebody you want catching your baby if you want to have them vaginally, but she is a great surgeon, and so I can't imagine that would have been the case. But in the hustle and bustle trying to get a baby out, I don't know. So let me know in the comments, how are you feeling after hearing that? Does your story sound a little bit like mine? I'd love to know. And then remember to grab those tools to keep your cool. They will help you breathe a little easier. If that story had you shaking, I know that I used to shake and tear up and feel sick hearing stories, telling my story. If you are having any of those, please use that tool to help you. Send me a message. You're not alone in these feelings. But I will see you next time on the Healing Motherhood podcast. Thanks so much for being here.